And hello, everyone. I am joined by Bonnie Nielsen today and Justin Armenta. Bonnie works at the Amon Group. Justin is here with JA Digitizing Studios and the Embroidery Nerd, and I'm here with the Embroidery Nerd. And today we're really excited because Bonnie put together a presentation for us that she's going to go through and teach us a little bit about her experience with digitizing a realistic animal. Um, so let me get that out of the way and that out of the way. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. Maybe. Oh, wait. We'll go with that one right there. And we'll share. And we can bring that up. And we will go to all the buttons. All right. Whenever you're ready, Bonnie.
Okay, well, thanks for having me back. I'm looking forward to today's podcast. I started doing this a long time ago, of course, punching, and the bulldog was one of the first, I would say, one of the first animals that I had to do fairly large. It was for a gentleman here in Germany who had a bulldog as a pet, and he sent me a photo. So I digitized this pattern about 18 years ago or so, and I had some problems with it because it puckered on me. And I thought, okay, how do I fix this? And I had kind of put it off to the side and forgot about it. And then I was watching, I think it was you, Justin, you guys were talking about Puff, and you were talking about global underlay.
Yes.
And then I realized what my problem was. Because in my book, I did talk about color blending, and I have this thing about a horse in there, which I had punched also. And if you can switch to the next slide, Jeff. Oh, is Jeff's offline? Oh, there he is. Okay, yeah. You can't really see it here, but on the left-hand side, where the circle is there at the top, the green circle, that's where the fabric was really puckering or really pulling a lot there. And because what I did was I was doing this in sections. When I did the fillings, they're all like, there's many fill sections in the background of this bulldog. And it was really pulling. And I thought, okay, it had to do with the directions of those fills and stuff. So I had adjusted them many times and I didn't get it. And on the right-hand side is the bulldog now, where there is no puckering because there is global underlay there. So that's how I fixed it. And also at the bottom of the left-hand side, the bulldog, the lower circle, you'll see this a little bit later as we go through it. I made a mistake there. I ran the well, it's not really an underlay, but kind of like a ground cover in the wrong direction. And then I was stitching on top. And as I was stitching on top, it pulled these gaps. So there's a lot of little things I did on the left-hand side that I would never do anymore. So we can start going through and I can kind of explain what I did. Okay, here you're going to see the old dog. And the old dog, there's like at the very top, that's the first part of his head, very top of his head. That's like one section. Then I did like the main area of his face with the eye. Yeah, that's a second section. Then I did his ear. And then I did his neck. And then I did his I would guess you would call it like the nose or the muzzle part. And each of those sections they were separately done with their own underlayers. So that means every section would run the underlayer and then the top threads. And plus I have curved fillings here. So it was really pulling on the fabric quite a bit. And I tried to back off these curves a little bit and tried to straighten them out, but I never got rid of it. So if you go to the next page, it will show this is the global underlay. I made it just a different color so you'd see it. So this sits underneath the other fillings, which is on the right hand side. So you so on the right hand side, these fillings have a bit of a wavy step in them. They're a little bit looser. So I've kind of made here on the left side the global underlay, and then I put in like yeah, a filling on top, which is not really a full density, meaning I tried to keep it light enough because I just wanted it to cover the background, but not make it so heavy and hard because I have another layer of thread coming on top going in other directions. And so this global underlay, which you guys were talking about in your puff things, really helped me to stabilize these curved fillings. And this is really important if you're punching this kind of thing, that if you are using curved fillings, then you really have to pay attention to where you start and where you end that fill, so that you're not constantly meeting in the middle of a fill, or if you're running a fill, like say his nozzle area, running it back towards his eye, because you're pushing the fabric. So I had spoken to Jeff about running the fill of the dog, so you could see it, the stitch lines. Um,
So the whole idea of the
mhm.
global underlay is just to make sure that the garment is stable, tacked down to the
Yes,
stabilizer. It's going to
yes,
flatten out any
right.
puckers or any type of loose material
Yeah,
in the garment before you start applying all these different layers. Um,
right.
Especially with those curve fills, I've noticed anytime, um, you know, especially with the realistic type designs like this, you want those curve fills so you have texture, you have kind of movement to those stitches, but those tend to push quite a bit. I think
Yes,
just the nature of how they sew. Um,
yes.
so yeah, global underlay is something I use quite a bit when digitizing for this reason.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really good tip. I mean, after all these years, you don't know everything, or I don't know everything. And I, after I was sitting there watching you do it just with puff, I thought, hey, I bet that would stop my curve fillings from pushing the fabric or pulling on the fabric way too much. Because I work
Mhm.
with really a lot of curved fillings. In most of my work, I hardly ever have anything straight, not unless it's a logo. But what happens with the curve filling, if you're trying to do something realistically, what happens is that it gives it more shape. And so you have a little bit more dimension to your embroideries, especially when they get up to at least a bigger size. This thing,
Right.
I think, we had something like 13,000 stitches. It's not, I think it's, I don't know, if about maybe 14 centimeters or so big, this bulldog.
Did you was this digitized for a certain type of thread? This isn't
This
standard
is
40
just an,
weight?
yeah, this is standard 40 weight. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And he originally wanted it on a like a sweatshirt. Um, I got some of the puckering out, but still I was quite irritated with the whole thing because um, it was one of the first ones that I've done anything like this. For this person, or for anybody actually, from a photo. And it's not so easy if you're working from photographs. I don't have the original thing anymore. I had I was just lucky that I still had the stitch data sitting around, and I pulled it up and thought, hey, this is something I can try with this global underlay and see if I can fix it. And it really, really helped. So I really appreciate that you guys were showing some of your stuff, and it just shows you that you don't have to use just global underlay on puff. You can use it on your regular stuff in general.
Well, pretty much in the stuff that I teach, it's the use on hats, period, just
Yeah,
to make sure you stabilize that hat and you don't have that movement on the curved surface, and you really stabilize that hat area before embroidering your final design. Um, Quick note: this just goes to show you, seasoned digitizers have those difficulties and those problem child designs that we may not get right on the first try.
That's
And
right.
there is trial and error to this, and any particular given design, it might give us a few hiccups, but if you give us time, we'll figure it out.
That's right. That's right. Like I said, even though I've been in for a long time, doesn't mean I know absolutely everything, because each kind of types of designs bring their own challenges. And so that's why I like to, if I punch something myself, I like to stand at the machine and see that thing run, at least through, until I know, before I give that thing out, that it's absolutely, running without problems. But this was just something that was just always in the back of my head about the stupid bulldog, and and thinking, those curved fillings, how am I going to get this out? And that was the key, was one of your webinars that I saw.
Oh,
Really,
nice.
really, really helped. Yeah, it really helped. So
Good.
now
Good to hear.
I'll apply it. I will apply it to some of my other things. It doesn't, like I said, it just gives me a nice background to put everything on top of. So everything's stable. The fabric is nice and stable. Even though I have many layers, you just have to be careful on your stitch density that it doesn't get too hard. Because now what will happen, now that I've got this basic part done with this global underlay, and then I put the other part on top of it, which is the brown, the rest of the dog's features with the curves, then I eventually get into the other details. So if you want to switch to the next folder.
If you don't mind,
Mhm.
just a moment, Bonnie, I'm going to go ahead and just pop into the comments here, and
Okay.
a few people just saying hello. We have Ramona saying hello this morning. We have Letty as well, and Cindy Knight. She's here. Um, we have Eric Campbell saying good morning, and always love
Yeah.
breaking up those big areas. Great
Yeah.
example. Um,
Oh.
Cindy talking about global underlay. You need good bones. Well, that's what holds up your embroidery.
Yep,
Exactly.
that's right.
And Eric making a comment, definitely watch those designs. So, especially when you're first getting into digitizing, you see your mistakes, you see the areas that need to change and why they need to change and how they're applied to the design on the machine. So, some good comments there.
Yes, that's the biggest thing that people need to really know, is whatever you do, it's great to see it run on the machine, and you'll see right away if something is working or not working.
Right.
The other part that I had on the old dog here, if you want to call it the old bulldog, I didn't know how else to name him. It was around his throat area, and you can see what happened in the embroidery part on the very right side here. You can see where those gaps are and the pulling. Don't ask me why I did it like this. I have nothing to say why. It was just a mistake I did, and for some reason, I think it was on the jeans you really see it. If you have like a light colored shirt, you probably wouldn't see it, but it looks rough. It doesn't look good. It's pulling on the other stitches, and for me, this is not a very good. Yeah, I just wouldn't do it this way anymore. I would run those underlaying threads in the same direction as the stitching on the top that I put on top afterwards. So basically what I'm doing all the time here when I'm doing this realistic stuff is I'm putting in like background layers, so that when I come with the zigzags on top, these zigzag stitches, which you'll see here eventually, you'll see that those colors will peek through. So you don't need a ton of zigzags on top, and it just stops having to do everything in zigzag. So you can use fill stitching as base layers and base colors, and then you can take your other thread colors and blend them on top. If you go in the same direction as the fillings, which are underneath, then you get more of a, I would say, a smoother looking color blend. But it could start looking a bit flat. So sometimes I go sometimes I start changing the angle slightly in order to give a little bit more texture to something, so that everything is not pulling always in the same direction.
Right, right. Yeah. So, in traditional design, corporate design that you're digitizing for everyday use, a lot of times you're relying on, playing that balance of your full density. I guess they refer to it as full coverage, to make sure that you don't have that garment color showing through. You have a nice flat fill.
Right.
But these realistic designs like that, a lot of layering is used to get a lot of dimension, a lot of texture, and because you're layering those, you can use the lighter densities in each level of layer. So eventually the full coverage is going to be there, just because you have so many layers on top of each other.
That's correct. That's correct. And you have to be careful also that you don't have too much overlapping of those sections, that they overlap just enough, because that's where you end up making really heavy spots in designs. So you can see around his nose or around his ear that there's only a small section that is really being overlapped.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even making a hole for his eye basically stops the buildup of stitches, so that you don't have, layer after layer after layer on top. So it's always this balance of how you do your details, and yeah, this balance of the underlaying threads, how thick they should, how thick the densities should be and stuff, and then you start getting into the details where you need a bit more closer stitching, so that the design will be prominent and not just vague looking. So
Right, right.
and I find it very hard, I must say, working on screen, trying to choose the colors. I choose the colors just enough so I can see everything, and then I try to have one so I looks like this is how it's going to be, and I pull those colors out from the palette, and then I sew them up and I see, oh, it doesn't look right. So sometimes the way that we see colors on the monitor are not the true colors of which I actually pick in thread.
Right.
So this is another thing that happens. Even though I have that color assigned here, does not mean exactly that was the color it was stitched up in, because the monitor colors, I can't get them looking the same as it is in thread.
And yeah, and when you're trying to, especially when you're trying to use blending and mix those colors well, um, not only is it important to do it correctly in the digitizing, but the thread colors have quite a bit of
Yeah.
effect on how it's going to look. If you don't have a library of like Bonnie has the whole library of Amon threads with her, I'm sure. But
Yes, I do. Yeah.
an embroidery house may only have two different tans,
Yeah.
and they don't have anything that's really close in the family of each other, so that
Yeah.
blending doesn't work as well as something like this.
Yeah, I mean, when you do realistic stuff, it's really hard. I understand, you can't have I mean, even at home in my private thing, I don't have all the colors I have here, of course. It makes it a bit frustrating because you think you've picked the right color, you sew it up and you go, well, it doesn't really look the way I want it. So yeah, that's a bit tricky. Trying to find the colors on the monitor, I don't know, then people might have to probably order a couple of different browns or something to figure out which one is going to work the best. But of course, the color matching, if you get it just right, then it really looks, from a distance anyways, it looks fairly good. It looks
Hmm.
fairly realistic. So this is something that's really important. Yeah, this is the new dog. The new dog, I left the global underlay underneath that. You don't really see it in the actual sewing, but I left it there, and then I put the white on top, or it's a cream color, at least I think it is here. And I went in a different direction. I went in the same direction as the top stitching would go, so that I would not get this pulling. So you can see that it covered up quite well, and it gives this kind of look of how his fur would be maybe on his on the neck part of him. And then you can stitch on top and let some of those other colors like gray or let some of those brown colors coming from the opposite direction kind of sink into it a little bit. So it works out fairly well. If you just got to get the directions correctly, and then it will be okay. So
One thing I wanted to note, I was that Bonnie was, good enough to share these designs with Jeff and I prior to the show, and I was kind of running through it and seeing how things were done. The stitch length on these kind of detailed stitches makes a lot of difference too. She's using a longer stitch length, which less penetration on that thread, more length of that thread sitting on top of that detailed area is going to catch more of the light. So you're gonna see more of that texture. If you come in here with really, really small stitch lengths, you're basically just really driving those stitches into your backfill. So you're not gonna really see that contrast.
right. I mean, hair, yeah, it's like fur is not really short normally, it
Right.
has some length to it. And if you want your embroidery to be a bit softer per se, you can lengthen them. This is what I usually do. And then the embroidery is not so hard afterwards, for one. Plus, it gives it this kind of sketch look effect that you do not get with short stitches. And also the fact that the longer a stitch is, the more texture you make. So if I was doing, like, say, a logo backfill, okay, and then there's letters on top, I usually use like a 3mm stitch length. And that usually packs it in really nice and gives it a nice solid wall behind those letters. And things like this that I'm doing, if I'm doing animals or if I'm doing things which are more my so-called Bonnie style, I use longer stitch lengths in order to get more textures. And they're not so long that they're going to catch and pull out, but they're long enough that you can at least see them. And that's a kind of, it's a bit of a trick to learn over time how long a stitch can be,
Exactly.
and not be dangerous, for anything. Yeah. Being constantly caught on something or whatever. But yeah,
Right.
if you look at a lot of hand embroiderers that actually do stuff by hand, if you're looking at some of their stuff, you can see that they're using sometimes very long stitches to create nice effects. And so I don't do any hand embroidery, but I have a lot of books on hand embroidery and just saw how they were making stitches. And plus I did a lot of sketching years ago and stuff. So it's kind of like drawing with thread, basically, is what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah. That's
So
definitely a good description of it.
yeah, because not everything is, click here, use this stitch, click here, use that stitch. Yeah.
I have a few more comments here. We have Amy saying, good morning. Really enjoying all that I'm learning in the book Punch, which is Bonnie's book here, that we have set for sale on our site. So go check that out if you have not got it yet. Chapter 7 has been especially helpful for the why, a bit of digitizing epiphany for me. Well, that's very good to hear, Amy. Some very good information in the book. Cindy is saying that my friend Eric recently discussed the coverage issue. Test.
Yes.
Absolutely. We have Lisa saying, good morning. One can never have too many shades. Exactly.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And Ramona is making a comment about the direction of the fur. Yeah. The natural direction of the fur versus the layer coverage followed by the fur direction. Yeah. So anytime you're having any type of realistic design, you want to try to think about the reality of the direction of what you're trying to duplicate in stitches. And like you were referring to earlier, the fur is not, it's going to be longer textures to it. You're not just simply trying to put a color and fill it in the best you can in an area. You're trying to get those realistic things. I know I find myself Whenever doing realistic designs, I'll find photos or whatever of whatever it is and kind of zoom in to those areas to see,
Mm-hmm.
what the realism part of it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
those
I
are
mean, yeah, I mean, for any kind of punching of any kind of animal or person or whatever, if you want it realistic, then you really have to know how the bone structures are.
Mhm.
You just don't feel a horse flat usually. You have to figure out where his legs are and stuff. And it's the same with the dog. You have its ear that sits on top. You have to have a hole for its eye. What I had started doing also, I started punching. Another thing I probably do a little bit differently here is instead of leaving a hole for his eye, I could have probably put in the actual eye itself or part of it, and then made the hole with the filling, so that it looks like it sits in more. But I had so much detail around this eye that it really didn't matter in this case. Um,
Gotcha. Hmm.
So, because your eyes sit inside your eye socket, they don't
Right.
sit on top of a fill. And this is something I probably would have done maybe a little bit differently if I had punched it from the very beginning, again. So, yeah, I mean, it, you can't say, well, you should do it this way or that way. It's more of an experimenting out which way will look the best in the end over time, as you work, as you keep punching this stuff. Normally I hardly ever go back to a design like this. Normally I just forget about it and say, okay, that was. But this time I really wanted to see if I could get the puckering out, and I did.
and
So,
and things like the eye, there's not always, one way is the only way.
right, right.
Sometimes two or three different techniques may work. I may have digitized this differently than you, than
Yeah,
Jeff, and all
yeah.
three would have worked fine. So
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, everybody wants to know, they think there's always this way, but not always. Um, I mean, if you had like two eyes, then sometimes if you had a full face of a dog, sometimes it's nice to connect the eyes together underneath, that you do
mhm.
the eyes and then do the fillings around them, but your eyes are connected so you don't have so many trims or something like this. But
Right.
in this case, it was only one eye, so I didn't have to worry about any of that kind of thing.
A couple of
Um,
more comments on the subject. I like to study thread painting by sewing machine, often seen on art quilts. That's definitely some good knowledge there. And
mhm.
Eric is adding that with animals, especially that references gold for like fiber, like thread. We can really get those patterns and layers represented exactly.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. This is true. So, yeah, here you can see that this is the part of the dog that there was no changes made. So, you can see that on the top part there, I have the base of the brown, and then I started putting these kind of like a light brown color highlights. So you can see it's kind of going in a similar direction as the fill background. And then I started with the gray tones, because this dog was a little bit older than he wasn't just a puppy anymore, so he had a little bit of gray in him. And so I tried to, yeah, leave the stitches going in a similar direction. And I tried to connect it all so I didn't have tons and tons of trimming. So you don't see lots of trimming here. So I'm always working from one part, zigzagging down into another, walking up, zigzag, and coming back down, to keep the machine running. This is just something that I've been taught to do or been known to do, even though this has just only been run maybe one time for this person. It's just I punch like this. I don't have tons of trims. I keep trying to figure out where I can start and continue if I can, so that I don't have to keep stopping the machine and wasting those 6 seconds or whatever it is for it to start up someplace else.
I'm going to go ahead and share an actual final look. Looks like this is just a computer rendering, but kind of gives you that final look with all the layers um, of the dog and the different textures and the realism that she captured here. A pretty impressive piece. How big did you say this was?
I think it's about 13 centimeters.
About 4
14.
inches tall.
About 4 inches tall.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or
Wow.
wide. One of them, the longer dimension, is about 4 inches.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
It's
yeah,
not. I
a
mean,
lot
it's
of
not
good
huge,
texture here.
but yeah, he's not overly big, but he's big enough.
Nice.
Yeah,
I'll go back to here.
yeah. Oh, yeah. This was something that I also did that I didn't like. On the old dog, on the left-hand side, around the eye, you see those bigger zigzags around the eye. You see how even they look? I don't know why I made them so even. So I went in and on the right-hand side, I just manually pulled them in because I didn't have all the stitch data, reference data anymore. So I had to go in and actually just pull some of those in, delete a couple of stitches and pull it in. So I made more like a zigzag. So it gives it a bit more of, if you want to say, natural look. And also around the nose and on the part of his mouth on the very edge on the right hand side, you see there's like a running stitch and then there's a zigzag over it. Well, you could see that when it embroidered because the stitch density of those zigzags aren't really high. So what I did was I went in and I added stitches. I just zigzagged up and then zigzagged back down. And so it gave it even more of a natural look because you would never see, a line going up through a zigzag that's, fairly open. So I was trying to hide those connection areas. And so I was able to do that.
Yeah, I
But
mean, when you're using really light densities
yeah,
for texture or for shading, like what you were saying earlier, you're trying to travel through the design with minimal trims. These are things you need to think about because travel stitches or underlay stitches, if you have full coverage on a satin or a fill or whatever, it's always going to be hidden underneath those stitches. But the fact that there's really low density to establish those fur shadowing and whatnot, you're going to see those travel stitches.
right,
Even though you
right.
may have underlay off if you're digitizing with a satin tool, because you're starting endpoints, work out that it has to travel back to another end and work its way up towards another part. You're going to have those
Mhm.
travel stitches. So, like Bonnie's saying, maybe add another layer to your element so it can travel back that way, but you're not using it as a running stitch underneath. You're using it as just more texture. But those are things that, for sequencing purposes, and to avoid a section trim, section trim, section trim, because that's kind of like the only way you're going to ensure that you're not going to have those excess travel stitches.
Yeah, that also, and plus all these like little knots that are made to tie something off, those are not there, so everything is running fairly smoothly and it runs through even more quickly. The other thing that you can see here, the difference is the old dog doesn't have quite much of an outline around there's no outline on top of his head or his neck. For some reason, I just didn't do it. I think it was probably because of the picture. He didn't have this black up there. And I was looking at this design after I stitched it up, the old dog anyways. When I stitched it up, I thought, it doesn't look complete to me. So I added on the new dog, you can see, at the very top of its head is completely with black outline and a little bit of zigzag around his back of his neck and down below. So it pulled it together a little bit better for me. I mean, maybe that's just a personal choice, but I felt as though he looked a bit more complete this time and a bit more natural in that respects, because everything was just kind of there with no detail in certain areas, and that was bothering me. Something which
Right.
didn't bother me before, but now bothers me. Don't ask me why. I guess maybe you just change sometimes your outlooks on stuff.
Oh no, wait! I don't
And
want to be big. We'll make Justin big.
Another kind of point to, if you are having using a digitizer, and there was a blog post a long time ago that I talk about, pick your digitizer that's basically an artist as well. When you have someone with an artful eye like you, Bonnie, you don't have to take things so literal where it's like, oh, I see color here, I need stitches here.
Mhm.
It's the interpretation of the design or the photo into stitches, and those decisions of, oh yeah, there may not be in the photo black at the top of his head, but if it's going to add to the design, if it's going to shape it better, work
Yeah.
better in thread, why not do something like that where there's that interpretation to make sure that it looks the best in embroidery, not just to match, artwork
Yeah.
or a photo exactly.
Yeah. I mean, this one that he has up now is the old one. I mean, it doesn't look bad without the black on it, but it's just, and this is how it used to, how it used to run. I did like one section with the underfill, and then came with these curved stitchings on top. So I've already pulled the fabric in ways which, when I came to the other fillings, um, the fabric started buckling on me, as everything started coming together. The fabric was starting to already buckle, and it's because you have to. I always put my underlay directions differently than my top fillings. I never use the same direction as my top fillings, and you can see, that it could be running in one direction, then the other direction, then it comes back over the top. I'm just trying to like build a grid-like thing. So I'm pushing out, even though I push up the fabric, then I push it back down. So these are things that I'm trying to be somewhat aware of, and I try not to always end right on the very, very end sometimes of a filling, or very end of a satin stitch. Because if I do trim, it sometimes gets pulled down in. And so I kind of end, or try to end a little bit in if I can. Not always, but sometimes. There I didn't, but yeah. This is the one that was not correct. Yeah. Or I found not correct.
Yeah, that fill direction being kind of going
Yeah.
vertically,
Yeah.
or horizontal stitches sewing vertically, and then coming back with the
Yeah.
perpendicular stitches over that. I could see how it
Yeah.
could really pull on those bottom
Yeah,
stitches.
because my top stitches are longer, and they're pulling. And well, because the stitch lengths are longer on both ends, it just pulled gaps, which was
Hmm.
really a bit silly. But I mean, I tried to bring in some highlights by, coming here and there, going back into the fur to give him some, yeah, highlighted sections. Then comes the gray. So you can see that I'm kind of zigzagging, making some of them longer, some of them a bit shorter, but tried to keep them as irregular as possible, because fur is not regular. It doesn't end all at the same point.
Right.
So I'm trying to just keep everything running in a similar direction.
Yeah,
Yeah,
unlike, again, when you're doing the corporate logos and stuff, and you have fill areas, especially in contrasting colors, you have that overlap to make sure that they don't pull apart. You're always taught to make sure that the fills are not in the same angle,
right,
because where they meet, they will blend together, and you'll have that kind of that zipper look to it. So you
right.
want opposing angles, but on textures like this, where you're trying to make sure that all those colors blend and get those textures, you actually utilize the same angle sometimes to make
Yeah,
sure that those two colors blend well.
right. Now this is the one with the global underlayer. I mean, I'm sitting there that day and I was thinking, how stupid am I? I should have tried that, But yeah, it happens. You find things and you go, okay. I mean, in this place, I use quite a long, around a 4 length, millimeter length stitch, um, keeping the base color quite long. Actually, this is the same color as the color that's going to come back on top of it, but I just wanted to be able to show people that it's, that there is this base thing. Now you can see it'd be the same color actually, but now you can see how it's sewing. So the curves are not as strong as they used to be, because I had backed off those curves a long time ago because of that puckering. And now I'm wondering how strong of a curve could I get on a global fill? I guess it's something I have to check out. But I used here these kind of irregular fillings. The rhythm is not irregular. The rhythms are irregular, so that they're not, a standard fill that you would get like a certain kind of, tight like pattern.
It's more of a hand
Yeah,
stitch type look.
yeah, that's right. And so if you can use all that underneath, which is all computer generated and through your softwares, and then what some of these areas in which I have, some of it is hand digitized, meaning sometimes I just go in and throw in some stitches in some certain areas if I don't feel as though I can get them with my punching it as a satin stitch with a jagged edge or something. If I'm just not getting the look I want, sometimes I'll throw in some stitches myself. The only problem with that is if you have to change the sizes of this, then those stitches do not change. The stitch lengths will always remain the same. So
Right.
that's the only danger in doing something like that. So if you want to be able to adjust making this bigger or smaller, then I would suggest not throwing any kind of hand or manual stitching in there, single stitches, I guess. I don't know how you guys, over here in Germany, we're always calling them manual stitches because they don't belong to a generated stitch program.
I've
So,
always referred to them as manual stitches. So what
yeah,
Bonnie's
okay.
what Bonnie's saying is like, typically when you're doing detail or traveling stitches, you use the run stitch tool, where depending on where you plot your point doesn't necessarily mean where the needle's going to penetrate only, because you set your stitch length. So your stitch length is going to dictate, how often that needle is dropping while going through that running stitches. Manual stitches is going to actually only penetrate where a point is plotted. So if she moves her mouse 5 millimeters, then that stitch length is going to be 5 millimeters. If the next time she only moves it 1 millimeter, then it's going to only drop the needle at that point that she's plotting those points on a manual stitch.
And I'm just looking right now. The original was 12,658 stitches, and this one is 13,680. So it's not a huge difference in stitch count.
No. Yeah, it did to go up a little bit because I decided to case it in with this black outline. I think it's a matter of a taste, how you want to do it. I don't think the old one looked that bad. It's just that there were little things that I thought could look better.
Right. And looking at it as, if you looking at it, so you might have felt, oh, look how many more stitches she's adding at the bottom with this global underlay. But necessarily she had each section had its own underlay programmed originally. So she's removing that part and just basically adding the same amount of stitches back in. She's just doing it all at once to make sure that area is stabilized instead of doing it section by section.
Yeah. I just found that it just took care of this problem. So, you could probably put it on any kind of fabric and it'll probably work with no buckling problems whatsoever. The tighter something is woven, the more the more buckling you're going to get, or the more puckering you're going to get. I see that I've sewn on so many kinds of fabrics, and the tighter the weave, the harder it is to get things to lay flat. Denim depends on the denim. But anyways, this worked. I mean, I don't have all kinds of fabrics here. I just have to kind of use what I could get my hands on. I would like to put it on sweatshirts just to see how it would come out, but I'm sure it would work better now since it's got this global lock underneath it. That really helped a lot. Really stabilized it a lot. I know that in Turkey that they use a lot of global underlays, and the reason why is because they're not hooping their fabrics. They have like the big bed machines, and then they, place the fabrics down, and then they start stitching, and they use a lot of global underlaying there.
Just to hold it down and keep it from.
Keep it from moving. Yeah. Okay. So I learned something from the Embroidery Nerds. So I'm quite happy that it worked what I saw. I thought, okay. So it shows you can watch all these podcasts and stuff, and you always learn something from somebody. It doesn't matter how long you've been in, you'll learn something. Or it'll remind you of something. You'll think, okay, I could have done it that way. So
And I always say that, I always have the thought that digitizers have their bag of tricks that they have there. That they're like, what can work in this particular design, and they pull out that trick out of their bag. But there's a lot of times where, as long as you and I have been doing this, Bonnie, Jeff and I can be talking about something, or I see something he does, and it just like sparks something where it's like, I've never looked at it that way.
That's right.
Therefore, I mean, not even just like, I'm going to use that exact technique, Jeff, but it may spark like, oh, well, if that works, and I had this problem with this design, I may be able to use a variation of that technique, and it'll solve a problem. I think a lot of times as digitizers, we're trying to solve problems. It's not only trying to make the design look good, we're trying to solve how it'll work on an embroidery machine. So there's those things that we got to remember. This is something that you're going to carry over to maybe another design in 2 months from now.
Yeah. What I really like about today in embroidery is that people like you guys and others, they're starting to share now where they never used to share their knowledge. It was kind of like, oh, you had to protect everything because that was your worth in the industry. And the problem is there are just no places to learn anymore. And I think this kind of thing is very, very important and helpful for other people, that they can, go somewhere and learn a little bit of something to say, okay, I can try it this way. Because that helps a lot, even if it might not be the same thing. But that's the point. I think that we didn't have years ago, put it that way.
Like Eric Campbell says, we learn and grow more together.
That's right.
Real quick before we get out here, I just wanted to point out Bonnie's book again. I'm going to post a link in the comments here. Go ahead and get Punch if you have not got it yet. There's a lot of great information in here. Again, there's a link in the comments. Go check it out. There's actually some signed copies available if you'd like one signed by the author here, Bonnie Nielsen. But I think we're going to go ahead and close it out. We're coming up to the hour here.
Yep. I would like to. I'd like to thank Aman for letting Bonnie join again. They're letting her do it at work, and so it's really great of them to let her use this time where we can all connect together because she's in another country, and give you guys these little these lessons here today. So I'd like to thank Aman for allowing Bonnie to do that for us.
Yeah, and I embroidered this all with the new EasyCord recycled thread, which they have developed. So it's a recycled thread, but it doesn't look any different than the other thread, the original thread. But that's what the bulldog was made with. Yeah. So
nice.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, with that, we have Justin Armenta from J Digitizing Studios, Bonnie Nielsen from Amon, and I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. And we're all here representing the Embroidery Nerd. We'd like to thank you guys for your time, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.